Warning: this content may be upsetting or disturbing to some audiences. The man had attached screwdrivers to a glove Wolverine style and was punching this woman in the face. Dispatchers, what calls have you taken on the non-emergency line that definitely were an emergency? I had a guy tell me he is on his way to ER and asked if we have a wheelchair waiting for him because he thinks he will pass out as soon as he shows up. Turns out he cut his hand clean off, and was driving one-handed bleeding all over the place to the ER. The dude even picked up his hand and put it in his jacket pocket. One of my instructors in 8 told us a story about how they were responding to a call where the patient was complaining about chest pain. For obvious reasons, he and the other EMTs were preparing for some sort of cardiac issue. They get to the scene just to find out that the patient's chest pain was due to the gunshot wound in his chest. This technically doesn't fit your criteria, since chest pain is also an emergency, but I figured it fit well enough. Used to work for the 111 service, which is supposed to be non-emergency. The most memorable ones was when a guy's wife just fell asleep. Yeah, she was dead. Another one was a mom called us after her 18-month-old wouldn't wake up, after she dropped it down a flight of stairs. She was contacting us about 7 hours after it occurred. One was a guy whose mom called us as she had some concerns for her son's mental health, gives me his number so I give him a call. All I hear is, "He's got a knife, please my baby," and the call cuts out. Everything turned relatively fine according to the call notes. A call from a phone box from a guy saying he was taking some drugs, he wouldn't say which, with his friend who then had an overdose and started foaming at the mouth and went a funny color, so the guy ran away. I asked when this occurred, to which the guy responded, "Spout 15 minutes ago." I never found out what the specific outcome was, but let's be honest. Plenty of strokes, heart attacks, kids drinking bleach, basically anything and everything you could imagine. You'd be calmly asking questions while frantically gesturing the universal phrase for "why the hell are you calling us?" When I took calls for 101, UK non-emergency police line, I had a strange call. I didn't really know who to call, but there's a guy walking down the street with a big knife and he's just stabbing trees and stuff. He turned out to be an autistic young man on his way back from fishing and was surprised and apologetic to hear that his behavior had caused alarm. There's a group of kids in McDonald's with a machine gun, and when I asked the caller why he hadn't called the emergency number, he got all uppity and replied, "Well, I don't know if it's a real gun, do I?" It wasn't, thankfully, but it's impossible to tell unless a trained officer is holding it in their hand. And again, this is the UK, so it is extremely unusual to even see a gun in the wild. Not a dispatcher, but got a call about a noise disturbance from a farm at the edge of city limits. Turns out a party had gotten hijacked by a tweaker who thought it was a good idea to break into a house full of teenagers. Turned into a 3-hour hostage situation. Guy crashed when the drugs left his system, nobody got hurt. Not a dispatcher but a paramedic. We got a call for a fall and the patient only needed help up. Per dispatch notes, reporting party said patient was breathing, conscious, and was at her normal mental status. We didn't run lights and sirens due to no apparent life threats and the relatively short distance, under 2 miles with light traffic. Get inside, patient is having a full-blown stroke, she is unresponsive, and was struggling to breathe. The wall right next to her head had a hole that busted through the dry wall. Patient ended up having a hemorrhagic stroke and it was believed to have happened when she hit the wall. We took her home on hospice a few days later. Still annoys me to this day about the whole situation, but you live and you learn. However, there is not much we or the hospital could have done. Family honored her wishes and asked for comfort measures. Not a dispatcher but I was the caller. I was sitting at a stop sign in my small town waiting for a semi-truck to finish going through the intersection. The trailer caught a power line, bringing it down onto my vehicle in a way that prevented me from just driving away and letting it slide off. I called the non-emergency line where I was told to hang up, call 911, and not touch anything in the vehicle that I could avoid touching, obviously. Fire truck showed up and used some type of insulated pole with a ground attached as a secondary measure to pull the line off of my vehicle. I drove a short distance to a safe area and gave a statement to police with the truck's dot and trailer plate number, while EMC shut off the line. A friend and I were walking my dog past a local elementary school over winter break when we thought we heard a fire alarm ringing and faintly smelled smoke. We figured we were both just over-imaginative, since nobody was around or seemed to be concerned. An hour later, as we were walking back, we passed the elementary school again and the alarm and the smoke smell were still there. We decided to call the non-emergency line since nobody else in the surrounding neighborhood seemed to have noticed anything and we didn't want to look like teenagers pulling a prank. Operator answered, and after we explained it to her she said, "Wait, you're telling me you think an elementary school has been on fire for the past hour and you didn't consider that an emergency?" The fire was pretty small, and there was no structural damage, but yeah, that was not a smart moment. I've never even told my mother that I'm one of the unnamed sources that alerted the authorities to a fire in a local elementary school. It is a secret my dog and I will take to our graves. Got a non-emergency call from a mother telling me her daughter, who was home alone, called her mom and said that someone just kicked in her front door and she was hiding under her bed with the person roaming through the house. So I dispatch all my units, in which they get there in about 2 minutes, and just turned out that it was the landlord that gave 24-hour notice to come fix a light. Definitely an emergency that turned out to be nothing. Mom should have called 911 in that situation. I've taken one where a guy told me that he just shot his neighbor, another where a man said that he woke up and found his wife had killed herself sometime during the night. Multiple elderly women to say that their husband had passed away in the night. Old women take it in stride, old men break down when they find their wife dead. I've been a 911 dispatcher for over 30 years now, and when I first started back in the late 80s in SE, Oklahoma, all the calls came in on our 7-digit hash. They didn't get 911 there till 2002. I moved to the city in the early 90s. Actually a dispatcher. Entire company was BLS, so generally only non-emergencies. Caller called to say that a man was attacking a woman outside. What she meant to say was that the man had attached screwdrivers to a glove Wolverine style and was punching this woman in the face, leaving perfect circle holes all over her face. All for her purse at 5 in the morning. She survived. A family called in because the elderly grandmother had injured her leg. They couldn't quite describe how it happened, but somehow, this poor lady's femur was broken and sticking out of the skin. Evidently this led to charges for elder abuse and neglect, and I can only guess they called the non-emergency line to downplay the severity. I used to work for 111, which is the non-emergency medical line here in the UK. I once had a call from a carer for an elderly lady, who was wheelchair-bound and pretty much immobile. Upon taking the call, one of the first questions I ask is, "Can I possibly speak to the patient?" Which is normally a quick yes or no. The carer hummed for a good couple of minutes before deciding no, I couldn't speak to the patient. Her reasoning? The patient couldn't breathe and was turning blue. Not me, but someone I know. We have this thing called Ärztefunkdienst, which is a non-emergency hotline where you can call on weekends and workdays from 7 p.m. to 7 a.m. if you are sick and want a visit from a general practitioner. It's to keep ambulances away from too many non-emergency calls. Usually people wait around 30 minutes to 4 hours depending on workload. One day a retirement home nurse, not sure if an actual nurse or someone else, calls and tells our dispatcher someone coded and they are providing CPR. The dispatcher guided them while also connecting to the main ambulance service. Just before he could connect them, they also told him their building is on fire. In the end the one guy coding was declared dead but no one else was hurt. Never heard what exactly happened or if the fire and CPR was related. It's usually old people. It's not an emergency but I fell 10 hours ago and have just now been able to crawl to the phone, just need some help getting up, on, and please don't have them using all their lights and sirens, I don't want to wake the neighbors. Or oh, I'm just having chest pain and can't really breathe right, just want someone to come check me out. Or, my husband hasn't been able to have a bowel movement in a while and now he's having really bad stomach pains. They usually downplay things that can go really bad for them really fast. I think they feel embarrassed or like they don't want to be a nuisance. Not a dispatcher, but hopefully this will still be interesting to someone. Early on when I was taking flight lessons, and it was fairly cold out one day but we didn't think that icing would be a problem since there weren't any clouds below around 12,000 feet. We got up to around 2,500 AGL, and my instructor, who although he had a few hundred hours flying, was still a bit new as a CFI, told me to do a power-off stall. This simulates stalling on final approach to landing. Essentially you slow down to approach speed, flaps extended, and then keep holding your altitude using the elevator without adding power until you stall. To recover you apply full power and pitch the nose down until you gain enough speed to level out again. So I stalled the plane, applied full power, and the engine almost quit. Which obviously is exactly what you want to happen when you apply full power to recover from a stall. The engine didn't actually die, but my instructor immediately took the controls and asked me to start going through the engine trouble checklist while he contacted the airport and asked for clearance to land as soon as possible. The controller gave us clearance, and then asked what was going on. When he found out, he very pointedly asked if we wanted to declare an emergency. At first my instructor started to say no, we've gone through most of the checklist without any issues, but then, and I can still remember the tone in his voice, he says no, we almost had an engine failure. We're declaring emergency, and changed our squawk code to 7700, general emergency. And holy hell did that get a response. They literally shut down the entire airport for the 15 or so minutes it took us to get back and land. It was early evening, and as we were coming back I could see the lights from what seemed to be every volunteer fire department in a 10-mile radius of the airport turning out to come up to the field and provide assistance if needed. My instructor's phone started blowing up because apparently a lot of his friends have apps that notify them when someone squawks 7700, and they saw our plane's registration number. Pro tip, don't do that. If there's an actual emergency your friends won't need the distraction. The controller at the airport was cool as ice, and he made regular requests for status updates as we came in. Fortunately there wasn't anything to report. And I could also hear him talking to a couple of airliners about 20 miles from the airport, letting them know where they would divert if we did end up having issues with our landing. As we lined up for landing I could see all of the airport's emergency vehicles waiting on the taxiway. And I do mean all of them, they really turned out the cavalry. The taxiway seemed to be just absolutely covered in flashing lights. I seriously could not believe it. We were just two random guys in a Cessna Skyhawk, and I am pretty confident that if Air Force One had declared an emergency, they wouldn't have gotten much bigger of a response than we did. Fortunately the ending is pretty boring. After we got within gliding distance of the runway they called off the volunteer firefighters, and we landed without any problems. We eventually determined that carburetor icing was the problem. Still, literally everyone involved, ATC, the airport safety chief, not sure of title, the flight school owner, and the other instructors at the school, said we made the right call. In the moment it was pretty scary, I still hadn't even learned how to land by myself, but it was a great lesson on taking things seriously and how much emergency crews would rather be safe than sorry. A tornado hit a nearby town and the influx of calls was too great for their county to handle. So I got the overflow. I took dozens of calls from a city I wasn't familiar with people screaming about being buried in rubble or saying that they couldn't find their child. One man said his neighbors were gone, because they lived in a manufactured home next door and the entire thing was missing. Not knocked down or heavily damaged. Missing as if it was snapped out of existence. That couple died. Not a great day. And for levity, this one should have caused more emergencies but didn't. We had a minor earthquake once, 5.2. This was shortly after 4:30 in the morning. I had dozens of 911 calls that went like this. 911, what is your emergency? Did we just have an earthquake? Yes. What is your emergency? Thinking a wall collapsed, someone is hurt, gas leak, etc. Oh, I don't have an emergency. I just wondered if it was an earthquake. My favorite of these was the woman who called about 5 minutes after it happened and goes, oh, what was it on the Richter scale? I was frustrated and said, sarcastically, I don't know, ma'am, our seismometer is broken. She says, oh. She wasn't smart enough to get the sarcasm. I'm a OOOEMD, so most of my calls are through the emergency line, but I also take overflow from our non-emergency line. Got a lot of stories of emergency non-emergencies, but you'd be surprised by the amount of elderly people that call through on that line where they can sit on hold for a bit if we are busy and have chest pain with difficulty in breathing, but don't want to be a bother. Also had a guy call up and was transferred from police because his 3-year-old was vomiting blood and wanted permission to use the emergency lane. I can't provide the permission, but I'm sure if he did use it no cop would book him. Not a dispatcher, but I'm a police officer. Got a call of a party down outside of a bar. We show up just to cover fire and paramedics. The guy is unresponsive and paramedics aren't there yet, so fire starts trying to wake him up. They pull his shirt up to do a sternum rub thinking he's drunk, but there's a little hole in the center of his chest. Poor guy got shot by some a-hole for no reason with a small caliber handgun. Nobody even knew. Round went through his heart and lodged in his spine. He was dead before he hit the ground. Needless to say, I was no longer there to cover paramedics. A guy my dad used to work with was opening up for the building early one morning and these guys jumped out of a car and grabbed him and the one guy shot him in the head. They think it was some sort of gang initiation. He ended up surviving and managed to get into the building and got to a phone and called for help. When he told the dispatcher what had happened, they thought it was a prank call and hung up. So he called again and got someone who believed him. He ended up making a full recovery. Thanks for listening to Radio TTS. Hit the subscribe button and activate the notification bell for more videos. Click the right box for the Emergency Operator playlist. Share your own story in the comments below and stay safe.